Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Blood, Law, and Rage. This is episode 2, and I am here with Cosmos. Um,
Hi.
so, first of all, Cosmos, would you like to introduce yourself?
Uh, hi. I'm Cosmos. Um, I like Elden Ring, and that's about it. I do some videos about it, mostly lore. I try to stream sometimes, and yeah, that's it. Really.
Those videos are pretty good. And there will be a link in the description to Cosmos for all of you who don't really know Cosmos very well. Um, but yeah, as per usual, all of the links in the description. If you want to ask the next person, if you want to ask any questions to the next person who's going to be coming on, which I believe is going to be a human Justicar, but we'll see how that goes. I've got a couple of people lined up, so we'll see.
Ooh.
Feel free to subscribe to the Patreon, and then also the Discord is now just open to the public. Link in the description and probably pinned comment as well. You can feel free to join it, message, ask me questions. Cosmos is in there. You might be able to ask them questions, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that's literally all of the like random housekeeping stuff we need from the beginning. So I got a couple of questions. The big one is a follow up to the last podcast. At the end of the last podcast, my friend Kage asked the question. Well, my friend Kage was like, "You should ask a question," and I was like, "So, what's your craziest theory?" Kage had a crazy answer. Nils had a crazy answer, and my answer was basically just, "So, you know this Cosmos? They got a crazy idea that Radagon is a mimic tier. So obviously there is the video, which again you guys should check out in Cosmos's channel in the description if you haven't already. But would you like to just like explain that, because I really want to talk about that.
Okay. So the Radagon is a mimic theory. I guess I should start with the what actually like started the thought, and
Hmm?
I guess it's like we're trying to find an answer here to the information we have. You could say that Radagon is Marika.
Hmm.
So like the game just drops that on us. We don't really know what it means. It just puts a lot of things into question. The logistics of it are not clear, and yeah, so we at some point we have to figure out what does it actually mean that Radagon is Marika. So I guess the idea is that one option is that Radagon could be a copy or a mimic of Marika, and there is like multiple, I would say, pillars to this theory in a way. Um, the first being that we know that Radagon is Marika, but not necessarily that Marika is Radagon. So
Hmm.
there is never like an interchangeability, I guess, in a way there. So it's Radagon is Marika. Marika is not necessarily Radagon, and um, the fact that, for example, Marika is also, I mean, there is hints that Marika could be related to the Eternal Cities,
Hmm.
which we know are a civilization that tried to create a lord through mimicry, and Radagon is a lord. So
Yeah.
uh, there is that, and then there's like a lot of miscellaneous stuff. But I would guess those are like the pillars that really starts to get you thinking and looking at more and more hints that end up constructing this theory that makes it more and more likely and believable that Radagon could in fact be a mimic.
I think like the part about it that interests me the most is the fact that like a lot of the theories of how like Radagon is Marika doesn't really explain more about the general story of Elden Ring. It just adds more to it and doesn't
Hmm.
answer any of the questions. This theory specifically feels like it answers questions retroactively. Um, so one of the like thoughts I've been stuck on for a really long time is, so if Marika is a Newman and Newman are the like either the like the descendants, not the descendants, the ancestors of the
Mm-hmm.
Nox, um, and the others are in the Eternal Cities. Uh, what happened with all of that, and why? Like they have a weapon that can kill a god, and they
Mm.
have a god, like they have a god effectively. But on top of that, they like were doing all of this stuff to create a lord, and yet they were
Yeah.
like shunned underground for it, and then nothing's really happening with any of that. Whereas this whole like theory of Radagon being a mimic kind of makes extra sense because there's potentially reasons why Marika herself would be willing to shun the Nox. But also, on the inverse, there's also like there's a lot of it's just this idea that like the reason why they were trying to create a lord and all of that was because of Marika herself. I think is
Hmm.
interesting.
Yeah, I definitely think that Marika is in on it, like all of it.
Hmm.
I know people have different interpretation, and obviously, like everything I'm gonna share in this podcast is gonna be my own
Hmm?
interpretation of the overall lore. But I definitely think that Marika is in on all of it. You said that, for example, that Marika would shun the Nox.
Hmm.
Even that isn't even clear if Marika actually
That's
shuns
true.
them.
True.
Um, Something I just realized extremely recently that I haven't checked. I just checked it recently. Did you know the Nox have golden eyes?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they do have golden eyes. They are not graceless.
Huh. So obviously, I know that like you can come across enemies that have the glowing golden eyes, but if they just naturally have golden eyes,
Not just yellow eyes, and
wow. Okay.
yeah, and the white of their eyes is red. If
Yeah,
that's
the
yeah.
sclera. Yeah,
So
that's
it's
interesting.
yeah. So there is even reason to think that they are not even graceless. I mean, we talk a lot about how like creations from the Eternal City that are based on silver are graceless, like the stuff like the Mimic Tears
Hmm.
and arguably the Albinorics, if you believe they come also from um, our creation of the Eternal
Hmm.
Cities. But the Nox are never referred to as being spurned or by the grace of gold or being graceless, even though they were punished and banished and
Yeah.
by the greater will, technically, as far as we know. But we also have like reason to believe that Marika herself is the one that controls grace. She's the one that guides the player, the guidance of grace. She's the one that takes and gives grace from the Tarnished in the story. And it seems that the Nox still have grace in their eyes despite everything.
Yeah. And something that's also like doubly interesting on this concept that Marika controls grace is firstly she took it from Godfrey, but then
Mhm.
also in Godfrey's his cutscene, you can see the grace is pointing towards the player,
At the player,
um,
yeah.
which is like which firstly is just mind blowing, but it's also something that's been around for a while. And a lot of people I've seen have suggested that that's actually just the grace of Morgott trying to influence Godfrey to go deal with the player. But the idea that she could be using the grace of Morgott in order to be like, go deal with the player, my husband who I had to
Yeah.
spurn so long ago. That's really
It
interesting.
yeah, it's the idea that like the guidance of grace would be Marika. I feel like there is hardly any other explanation for that. I don't think throughout the game we have this impression that the greater will is the one in control,
Hmm.
but we also have hints that the greater will is so far and disconnected from the lands between he cannot exert any like direct influence on it.
Hmm.
And it seems like that's why he has to resort to having a vassal like the Elden Beast, someone
Yeah.
that can rule in his place in that land. And even the Elden Beast itself doesn't seem to be able to like exert control over its host, like to an extent at least,
Hmm.
because Marika obviously went against the Elden Beast and it shattered the Elden Ring, and the Elden Beast didn't do anything about it. Um, so yeah, there is reason to believe like it's really Marika that controls it. There's also the fact that the guidance of grace guides you towards the path of burning the Earth Tree and freeing destined death.
Yeah. That's true.
So it has to be someone who, the person who controls that grace has to be someone who wants those things to happen, which I doubt would be, you know, the Greater Will or the Elden Beast or the Fingers for that matter. So yeah.
Also, like extra interesting to consider that like that would also make sense for why there are sites of grace like in the lands under the lands between. So
Hmm.
all of the like Nokron, Nokstella, all of that, there obviously are sites of grace there. And on top of that, if I remember correctly, they do also guide you places down there as well. Um,
I cannot remember off the top of my head, but
I think
I
they
would
do.
believe it.
And I'm also pretty sure that there's only a few places in the game they don't guide you to. And I think the only places I can think of is I don't think they guide you towards the Halig tree, but I'm not
Mm.
100% sure on that. I'd have to double check that.
Yeah, I can't remember
And there's
honestly.
somewhere else, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. But I know that there are some places that like it doesn't guide you directly. Which
Yeah, yeah. Um, I guess we should maybe we went off on a
we
tangent.
did, yes.
Maybe we should go back to the topic of Radagon is a mimic. Like one
Hmm.
of the interesting things about that is it's something that I did not realize until much later, and it was like literally something I found out when I was recording for the video.
Hmm.
It's when I found the red hair inside the ember egg. Like that's something that I always wondered. Like I tried to get a better look at it,
Hmm.
you know. But then when I got like the free cam with the cheat engine and I decided to get footage of the video and I went really inside of it and I found the red hair inside after having already formed the theory that he
Hmm.
could have been created by this ember egg. It was one of the like very few things in the game could have confirmed to me
Yeah.
that theory more than that. So I think at this point, because of the way I formed the idea and the way I reached that conclusion and the evidence that I found later, at this point, to me, like Radagon Izmik is basically canon in my head. Like
Yeah. I mean,
there is no way to like remove that, like to convince me that that's not the case. Almost.
that was one of those things where when I was watching the video, I genuinely had this moment of being like, okay, like this theory makes a lot of sense, but there's nothing like that's a like it's just a theory, right? As soon as I saw the like red hair in the egg, I was like, this does make a lot of sense just in general, but
Mm-hmm.
like, that's insane. Like
It's
it
really
fits
like
far too well.
yeah, it's a really strong bit of evidence like that's really like well hidden too. So it's like it really gives it a lot of credence. And I also found like the bit of hair I found
Hmm.
in the ember egg the first time. There's just like I don't know, like four like strands of hair
Yeah,
inside. But I later like when I went to check again later, there is like a whole bunch like
yeah.
on the bottom side of the egg, like a lot, like actually a lot of red hair. So yeah,
That's it. Also, kind of changes a lot of other theories. I think. So, firstly,
for sure.
obviously, like the amber egg having Radagon's head, even if it wasn't to do like if we were to just take the mimic theory away for a second,
Yeah.
um, it does kind of make sense because it is like Radagon's egg that he gave to Renala. Um,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
also like if you go a little bit further than that, there's like two big theories in my head that like come up with that. The first one is the whole theory of like Radagon is effectively like a cuckoo, um, and the reason why
Mm.
so Rani, one of the theories is that the reason she's an Empyrean is because she was born of the egg rather than like
Okay.
Renala, which could also make sense. But the fact that there's red hair in the egg and you can see her body has red hair, it
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily prove anything, but it's just interesting. Like obviously she is born of Radagon one way or another. So her having red hair isn't strange, but it's just I find that quite interesting.
This made me think back of some people also said that Renala is trying to rebirth Rani because she
Hmm.
thinks she's dead. So
Yeah.
there's also that. Yeah,
Which
that's interesting for sure to think about.
yeah. And if I remember correctly, all of the scholar children have Renala's colored hair. It's brown
Just
hair, black or
black
brown.
brown
Yeah,
hair. Yeah.
I think it's black actually. Yeah. That's that's also extremely interesting because something I literally just realized is it makes sense that all of those scholars are just like clones of Renala then,
Hmm.
or like something similar because they,
I
yeah,
hmm. I they might
might be,
be. Okay, so here's the thing.
yeah,
I always thought that they were like people who would go to Renala for rebirth,
yeah,
and I think there is some item I would have to check, but I think there is something that references that people from the academy
hmm.
uh, would go to Renala for rebirth. It was something that happened at some point, but they would be born like short-lived. Was the
Yeah,
issue? There is also the fact that because you talked about the clone of Renala, and that's something that's really interesting because even this whole like Radagon thing, mimic or not, it puts into question how the Ember Egg actually works. And there
Yeah.
seems to be like two ways that it works. One is that it takes your body
Hmm.
and somehow through the use of the core of a mimic tier, your body changes.
Yeah.
You just change. There is an effect animation, and you just change. In the Bok quest line,
Yeah.
he also gets there. He uses the item. He changes. He's like in a human form. He dies 5 seconds later. But
Hmm.
anyways,
Very
so
sad.
yeah, it is very sad. So there is definitely that aspect of how it works, but then there is like the other aspect of like, okay, let's say Radagon is a mimic, so it means that with the Ember Egg, it
Hmm.
straight up uh, popped out another Marika, like a
Hmm.
second Marika, and that's different from what we know from how we know the egg to work. But there is something interesting. I was having this discussion like in some Discord at some point.
Yeah.
In the second phase of Renala, like when Rani shows up and she
Yeah.
gives her like tirade about I don't remember what she says, and another Renala pops out and it's like a Renala in her prime and she
Hmm.
fights you and you defeat her. So here's the interesting thing: like what happens there is unclear. It seems that what happens is that Renala, like Rani, uses the egg,
Hmm.
and then another Renala emerges from it. But the first Renala is still right there, like
Yeah.
right next to you, you know. And even after you defeat that prime Renala, like the other Renala was holding the egg all along. She moved on with her life. She doesn't even care anymore. So it's like there is a question: what was that? Was that an illusion, or like if it was an illusion, why did she use the Ember Egg? And what did Rani do with the egg? Did she actually pop a second Renala from the egg? Like
Yeah.
literally make a copy of Renala on the spot from the egg? It is unclear, and it really puts into question if the Ember Egg can actually do that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I always assumed that that was just some sort of like illusionary magic. But
Yeah.
all of the like magic we see that creates clones tends to leave them a specific color rather than the full color of their character, right? Like for
Yeah, and
example,
yeah.
Loretta and like Morgott. Oh, actually, that's a lie. Margit is the only exception I can think of.
Yeah,
Or
who knows what
Moog as well,
Margit is
actually.
doing? Yeah, Moog too. They can just project themselves apparently. Like,
Yeah. Is that that's the other alternative, that rather than using the egg at all, Rani is doing that, but for Renala.
but even then it
Even,
would be different
yeah.
because like Mog and Morgott, like, uh, they are there in a way. Like
Hmm.
it's almost like they are projecting their presence and appearing somewhere. But with Renala, it's like two distinct
Yeah.
entities. Like the one which we don't know if it's an illusion or an actual one, and the other one that's mind broken in a way, and that's just crawling next to you when the cutscene happens.
And so
So
there's like so many thoughts, and I have to like. I'll start
yeah.
with the next thought on my mind with that is then we have the rune of the unborn after we defeat her, and I think that's the main reason why we don't. When we change, it seems perfect, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
Mm-hmm.
everybody else, it's not perfect. Um, and the interesting thing for like the sweetings, right? Like the students that get changed, if it is just a case of Renala is like mind broken to some extent and is trying to rebirth them, the process isn't perfect because they don't have the rune of the unborn, and then moving on past that, she's then giving them some of her like genetics or just fully her genetics, right?
Mm.
That's really interesting. Because one of the ideas that I've heard a lot of is that the Carrion family has either some of them are Albinorics, or they have like genetically, like they're genetically not the same as everybody else, and they were like the first version of the Albinorics. It's kind of hard to explain, but
Mm.
the theory basically comes down to their genetics is what the majority of the first version, like the first tier of Albinorics, were based on. Which is why like Renala looks like her legs are like absurd, like she's absurdly tall, right?
Yeah.
And her legs don't necessarily look like they work as well as they probably should, because she never gets up, she never moves or anything. Um, and
Mm.
on top of that, there's the whole stuff about Loretta being obsessed with Albinorics. I'm not necessarily sure I even believe in either of these theories, but just the concept that maybe the Albinorics came. I'm not sure whether they were around before the egg, but it could be something to do with the egg then.
I all right, so the Albinorics, honestly, it's really hard if I think about it to pinpoint when. I don't think there is any notion of when the Albinorics would
Hmm.
have appeared. Um, yeah, it's weird. Honestly, the Albinorics. Okay, what we know from them is that they are born from a silvery liquid, right?
Yeah,
So they are said to be born from like ripples in a silvery liquid. That in my mind instantly ties them to like mimics and
of
like
course. Yeah.
the eternal cities. That's the obvious like leap or assumption you can make. But them being tied to the Carians, uh, do they even have? I mean, there is some in the Carian Manor,
There's some
right?
in the
Like,
Carrier Manor, and then there's also quite a few in Volcano Manor, which
oh
Rykard
yeah,
obviously being.
Rykard did bully them a lot, didn't
Yes,
he? Yeah.
and Rykard is obviously her son. So,
Yep.
and then on top of that, there's also the whole trend of Loretta wanting to bring the Albinorics to the Halig Tree, um, which
Right.
is its whole other thing.
I'm trying to see it, but honestly, it would take more. Uh, like
It's
there's definitely a
yeah.
sort of connection there, but I would need like at least two or three more of that to be able to really like start thinking seriously about
Oh
like the
yeah.
Karian. I don't know how like there's also the we can just bring cut content into the discussion.
Mhm.
I don't know if you care, but
That's fine. Completely. Go ahead.
because if we go by cut content, it's like straight up confirmed that they are like results of Eternal City
Yeah.
experimentations, and which seems to fit fairly nicely with what we know.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, we could talk a bit about cut content. I think that's an interesting discussion we can have about like when is it okay or not okay, and like what approach to use when we use cut content when trying to formulate like lore theories or discussions, for
Yeah,
example.
that's definitely a very interesting thing. Honestly, I'm down to talk about that right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think with cut content, I'm always very apprehensive to formulate too much. I'm talking about it,
Yeah.
but purely because of the nature of how much research I do for these videos and how much it comes up, there's always going to be some level of I see something in cut content and it's going to seep into the theory.
Yeah.
Um, there are some versions of that where it's just more of a passing note, reference the cut content, and that's it. And then there are other points where I feel like it definitely changes the way I see the theories. And I'm not even necessarily sure if that's a good or a bad thing. I think it's more of a case by case situation.
Yeah. The way I see it personally is so there is two types of cut content, right? There is the because we know that from software and Miyazaki, for example, the way they work on the story is very subtractive. So like
Hmm.
they construct this story and then they start subtracting information just to leave us the gaps, and then we can try to work out in a kind of archaeological way what happened and fill the gaps whatever way we want.
Hmm.
Uh, and then there is the cut content that's just cut because it was changed and it's
Yeah.
not valid anymore. And I think there is a sort of uh, balance. So we're trying to identify what is actually information that we're not meant to see because it's valid, but Miyazaki doesn't want us to know it,
Hmm.
or if it's information that's just not doesn't work anymore in the current iteration of the story of the game. And I think the way I approach that is that if I can, first I need to be able to formulate a hypothesis,
Hmm.
and then I can work my way. If I can like genuinely formulate a hypothesis purely from what I have in game,
Hmm.
and if I then go try to scour in the files for some sort of text that wasn't in the final game
Hmm.
that would reinforce that idea or confirm it, then to me it's like in the theory of like okay, that's kind of acceptable.
Yeah.
That's kind of valid to use because you formulated your theory and then you found like more evidence or confirmation directly in the content, which implies that the fact that you were able to formulate it to begin with implies that um, maybe the theory was like the idea is still exists and is still valid in the current iteration of the lore. So yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's also very interesting seeing, like at the very least, the way it evolved through the game. Like, so for Miquella specifically, I've done a lot of like videos
Mhm.
on Miquella, and I'm gonna be honest, I've got like 4 or 5 more planned. Like, I have like a lot of notes on a lot of different characters, but just the thing is that Miquella was just a rabbit hole that just kept turning into more rabbit holes. It's rabbit holes all the way down, and I don't
Yeah.
know. It's getting to the point where I'm like, I gotta do like 1 or 2 more videos and then just move on to another character for a bit, just because I just got so much stuff, but I can't keep sat on Miquella for the rest of the time. It's um, but yeah, that's a bit of a tangent. But specifically for Miquella, there's the 2 big things that I thought were really interesting is the cut content for Miquella's rune being the rune of abundance. Then,
Yeah.
like on that same trend, there's the original version of the Malenia boss fight and the twin scythe or of like abundance and decay. Um, and
Mhm.
obviously all of that stuff was just like taken out of the game and changed completely. Where like specifically with the boss fight, I think it's very interesting. Where originally it was going to be that Miquella gave Malenia, like basically made Malenia's rot worse in order for them to win against you, and Miquella was probably intended to be more of like an ally to the player, because of the way that, I don't remember the exact wording, but there's this idea that you were friends and now you're betraying them to kill them, which is quite
Oh.
it's rough, right? Um,
Yeah.
but obviously that's changed entirely. So that content is basically just like, I'm gonna point that this thing exists, but it
Yeah.
doesn't help in the slightest. Um,
Right.
and then on the other side, there's a lot of content about Miquella that so I haven't got like cheat engine or anything. I just use a free cam mod. So all of the
Mhm.
stuff that I find other people have usually found. Um, so there's a couple of lines referring to the fully voice acted, that refer to Elphael as a Burian, um, which
What's that?
exactly, it's just as far as I can tell, it's just a different name for it. Um, but
Oh.
like all it really comes down to is that a Burian is meant to be like this chalk city, which is basically just Elphael under a different name. Um,
Okay.
but the reason why I'm bringing this up as like the alternative is obviously they changed the name, but the vibe and the way that Elphael seems is exactly the same. Like the stone, for the most part, is all looks like chalky ivory style coloration, which is what I think they intended. Because Ebor specifically means ivory, I believe.
Uh
Um,
huh.
and then obviously like the person who was talking about it is Albus. So instead of being like go to the Halic tree, go to Elphael, Albus was like go to Aburian is the best place on the lands between. Um, which firstly is just quite funny because they was just like, yeah, no, we're just changing the name. But it just gives like a slightly different idea because instead, rather than just being like a white city, which I think is again like suggestions towards like Minas Tirith from Lord of the Rings or something like that, right? Um,
It definitely looks like it too.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Rather than being that, they just changed it to Elphael, which just means God's work, which has slight like it just gives us more information, I think, because we get this idea of where we started with Minas Tirith, a white city, ivory, chalk, that kind of idea, and then they moved on with like actually, it's more accurate to call this city God's work and reference that Miquella was effectively the most likely to become the next god. Um,
For sure. Yeah. There's also like on the same topic. There's also the
mhm.
whole like Saint Trina cut quest
Mm.
line, which is the idea that Miquella is Saint Trina is at this point it's all but confirmed like
Yeah.
in the game in what we have, and even then in the content we have like straight up an NPC questline that confirms it.
Yep.
That's straight up related to that. That was completely removed from the game, sadly.
Mm.
But yeah, it's another example of one of those things that just fits perfectly in the current iteration of the game's lore, but still gets removed eventually.
Yeah. I I find it really interesting the way that they cut quest lines specifically, because there are about like 3 or 4 different quest lines I can think of where at the end of the quest line something very specific is told to you when it out the cut quest line. So for the Centrina one, it's obviously Miquella is Centrina. For the Asimi Mimic tier one, it's the kind of idea that the Mimic tier can like be against you more obviously and have its own will, which again, Radagon is a Mimic tier. It just makes too much sense. And then, if I remember correctly, there's something in the Vike one where there's like connections to the Frenzied Flame that go a little bit deeper, but I haven't really gone far into that quest line specifically. But that also just makes a lot of sense for the way they like made the game, because cutting those quest lines, while those quest lines are definitely extremely interesting, and I would have loved to have played through all of them, it almost fits the way that they wanted to show everybody the game, right? Where they just want to show you the overall picture, take a couple of puzzle pieces out, and leave them for you to figure out.
Oh, I bumped the mic. Sorry.
Fine.
Yeah. I definitely like. I want to say I disagree. I'm like, just give me the quest line, because they seemed like they were like actually good quest lines, and just remove that bit of dialogue or rewrite it. You know,
that's
like
fair.
Especially like the. I feel like this is a completely different topic from lore, but just in terms of like gameplay, Elden Ring does suffer from too much combat syndrome in a way. Like there is nothing to do in the game but kill stuff, especially for an open world game. It could have used some more extra non-combat activities, especially like for the Centrina questline, when you would go around and find these sleeping various creature things and like capture their dreams, you know. And I think like the game would have benefited from having that quest line, and also for the Asimi tier, it's just a way better way to obtain the mimic
much better.
spear like summon. Like it just makes so much more sense, you know. It's especially for a spirit summon that is absolutely broken. Like this
good.
is especially like before the nerf, like it was so strong, and it would validate how strong it was because it was locked behind this whole obscure quest line that you had to do, you know. So yeah, I think some of that does retract a bit from. I feel like they could have been like a good addition to the game, and maybe they could have just reworked the writing a little bit if they wanted to, you know, just keep the things less clear and more obscure, like they always do. Like the difference between the descriptions we have in 1.0 and like the current iteration of the game can be extremely different. And sometimes they purposefully reword things to make them more like less obvious, like
more obscure.
less clear, more obscure. Yeah. So there's definitely that. I do think though that the Centrina stuff was probably mostly cut because maybe they are saving all of that for a DLC package.
We can hope.
Yeah, we can imagine.
I'm quite surprised that they didn't do more of what they did with like Nefeli Lu, where obviously version 1.0 didn't have like basically any of the Nefeli Lu questline, if I remember correctly, and then they added like half of it, and then they finished it off a couple of patches later. Surprised they haven't added more patches with just more small quest lines along the way, because the only thing I can really think of is that they changed the Vare quest lines so like very recently, so that you can invade somebody while being offline, you can finish the quest line.
They definitely could. Like honestly, for example, like Jarburg is a pretty decent bit of cut content. Like it's not just an ending to a quest line, you know, it's like a whole thing. I mean, I guess it's the ending to the what's his name? Dialos?
Dialos, yes.
Yeah, I guess it's the ending to Dialos' quest line. But also the whole like area and the stuff inside and the NPC. That's quite a decent bit of cut content that they just added later. So you never know. Maybe there is more hope. Honestly, for example, if you think about the Colosseums,
Hmm.
the Colosseums are one of those things that seem like the game gives me the vibe that they are going to be added. Like there is
Yeah.
no way they're just going to stay like that. Like when the game like doesn't have any more support, there is no more DLCs, no more patches, and they were still going to have the empty, pointless Colosseums. There is no way they were there just for flavor.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm not sure if they're going to be packaged in a DLC or if they're just going to be added in a patch. And I can definitely see them being added just in a patch, like a PvP patch, and maybe like those are arenas or something.
Yeah. I feel like for this game they would. So I'm gonna speak some blasphemy. I've never played a FromSoft game. I mentioned this in the last episode as well. I've
Oh
never
my
played a
god.
FromSoft game other than Elden Ring. I have Dark Souls 3 and I have Sekiro, and I will play them at some point. And I've watched like a lot of lore on all of the pretty much all of the Dark Souls, and watched playthroughs, mostly speedruns of all of the Dark Souls. But from my understanding of like how it kind of went for most of those games, is they had some level of longevity with their like patches, adding small things here and there. But I think the way that FromSoft has handled this game had a little bit more of an intention of, yes, we had this big release, but also there's a lot of stuff we still need to add. And by doing that, it has also, I feel like to some extent, added to the longevity. Because, I mean, it's been what, like 5 months, maybe just under 6 months since? And Elden Ring isn't obviously the biggest game on the market still. But while it doesn't have like the most concurrent players anymore, considering it's a kind of game where you finish the game and you're done,
Yeah.
I still do notice every once in a while, like even friends who don't care about the lore or anything, they boot up Elden Ring and they go play a little bit again because they're like, oh, they added a patch with like this new NPC for me to invade. Sure, I'll go deal with that. I think it's quite interesting.
There's definitely a big difference in how they handle the previous games. Like, okay, I was gonna say something, but I realized it's wrong. I was gonna say that there was never any instance of them adding content post
Okay.
launch, like other than DLC specifically.
Okay.
But actually, I realized there is like maybe like 1.5 instance of that happening. Usually, any support like Souls games got after release were patches and balance and PvP related balance, I would say.
Yeah.
Bug fixes and all that. Then you get the DLC, which is the big content. But like trickling some content and finishing some quest lines and adding some NPCs, that never happened before. But there is actually an exception to this. I just realized. Uh, Sekiro did receive a very random ass patch 1 year later that added some sort of content. It added the gauntlets, which are like a new system where you can just face off bosses one after the other, like a boss rush mode, and you can unlock like new skins for the main character, which is something that they never did before. And I guess the only other example for people who played Bloodborne, which is not really an example, it's more like a half an example, is that before the release of the Old Hunter DLC for Bloodborne, they added a Covenant and an NPC.
Oh, okay.
But like, it's right before the DLC, and like he was part of. You could imagine that he was part of the DLC, but they added him on his own. Even without the DLC, just a tiny bit before the full DLC release, as far as I can remember. If I'm wrong, I'm sure someone will tell me will tell me I'm wrong. There is no doubt about that. But yeah, those are the only instances I can think of. But with Elden Ring, there is definitely a semblance of more continued support for the game.
Yeah. That's quite interesting. The other thing, speaking of the gauntlets, that I think is really interesting is outside of the majority of boss arenas, at the very least, like the demigods, I think there's this odd like small pillar that you can find. It's like a tiny, it's like half the size of the player, right? And it just looks like a little obelisk, and you can't do anything with it. It's just
I'm
there.
sorry to burst your bubble, but that's the resurrection monument. That's not the stake of Marika.
Yeah.
That's what allows you to summon spirit summons.
Is it?
Yeah, that's the
Oh,
thing that lets you
that
summon
makes so much sense.
spirits. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I just had like my theory for that since the beginning was just like eventually you're going to be able to like summon the bosses back at some point. which
Oh,
I
yeah,
think
no.
could very
I
easily
mean,
still happen, but I don't think it'll be
it
the
would
same
still
thing.
fit. Yeah,
It
it would
would.
definitely still fit. Yeah.
But okay, that makes so much more sense. Okay.
See, this is what happens when you don't read your tutorials, because I think they show a picture of it, like they are like when near
uh,
a rebirth monument, and there's like I think
I
a
read the
picture of
tutorials. I'm blind.
it.
uh, it's what that's like a thing that is just like a trend with me for some reason. I just notice like really obscure things, but some of the stuff that's like right in front of my face, I just completely miss, which
Like,
is really quite funny.
yeah, like Gideon Ofnir being covered
Oh
in ears.
yeah, we had a conversation about this in our DMs, and we were talking about how um like one of the characters otherwise might be referenced to as the all hearing by a finger reader. And I was like, the all hearing, that kind of makes sense because Gideon Offlinger is like the all knowing and probably the all seeing because I saw all of the eyes on Gideon, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I was like, I don't necessarily know if he's the all hearing, but like, yeah. You were just like, no, he has ears literally all over him, Rage. What are you talking about? And I was just like, wait, what?
Is this really bathing in ears?
Literally bathed in ears. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Just completely missed it. That's really funny. Okay. So I think we should move on to one of the other like main questions. So we were talking a bit about the DLCs, and I think it's quite interesting. I'd like to know what you think the DLC is going to be, because I realize that I guarantee you we're both going to be wrong on what the DLC actually is, almost
Oh yeah,
certainly.
100%.
But
The
yeah,
go ahead, finish your
I was going to say, just
thought.
what would you like to see out of the DLC, and what do you think it is? Because I think those are two different questions. But
Mm, yeah. Honestly, what I think is gonna be, there is no way I can answer that because I don't think I have ever seen a single time someone call out what would a FromSoft DLC be about. Like not
Hmm,
a single time have I seen that happen. Um, but there is an element of me like tricking myself into believing that this wishful guess that I would actually want to see is something that could happen. Um, there is definitely there's a lot of options. I feel like also if we shoot like a bunch of shots, one of them could possibly land. But I
True.
feel like the big one that people are assuming are like Miquella DLC.
Hmm.
It does seem to fit because like even in game he's kind of referred to as this like he's very obviously like this incomplete part of the story that should
Hmm.
be expanded on. Like even the characters in the game talk about him with like there is more to this. Like Gideon says Miquella is like the key to understanding, to getting the full picture. Even when you find his cocoon, he's still like mumbling to himself about what to do with the cocoon. Like there is some continuation to that we don't have. And he's the only demigod that we know from the Shattering that we haven't actually met or get a chance to get their great rune. Also Rani. We don't get
Yeah.
Rani's great rune, but yeah.
True.
So there is like this really, I want to say like almost bait. Like Miquella
Yeah.
is a DLC bait at this point. Not sure if that's gonna happen, but my theory is that Miquella's DLC is not gonna be about dreams quite as
Hmm.
what people think they are gonna be. I think they're gonna be related to the afterlife and the spirit world.
Hmm.
And I think that what Miquella is doing by dreaming is traveling to another world, in a way. We know that from Castle Soul lore that Miquella is somehow doing something to try to return the souls of the soulless demigods,
Hmm.
and it's trying to summon the eclipse to do that. So it could be interpreted that maybe the eclipse is a sort of, it's described as the protective star of the soulless demigods, but it could be seen like as almost a portal
Hmm.
that would open this gate to the spirit world, and we could bring back the soul of the soulless demigods. And Miquella is trying to actively achieve that. So I think maybe him dreaming is also trying to reach this afterlife. And it wouldn't be the first time that From Software also dealt with these concepts, because in Bloodborne there is this whole thing about this like H.P. Lovecraft mythos thing about dreams not being just dreams but literal other worlds
Yes. True.
that you access by dreaming. There is there is also the notion of one of these worlds being an afterlife. The Old Hunter DLC is basically going to a dream world, like a layer, which is the hunter's nightmare.
Hmm.
But that hunter's nightmare is actually a purgatory for hunters who died because they were cursed. So there
Hmm.
is also this notion that this dream world, which is another world that you can access with dreams, is also an afterlife for people. You know, so there is this connection that FromSoft already threaded these themes, I want to say.
Hmm.
And there's just the fact that I really want to see the Helfen, like the spirit world. Like it's one of the most intriguing and interesting parts of the lore. Like in terms of like wish list, that's probably like the
Yes.
number one thing I want to see. So I just found a way to connect it to Miquella, and there you
Yeah.
go. Maybe that's the DLC.
To be fair, that does make a lot of sense, and I've heard a lot of people suggest that the lands between are like already the version of like the underworld or the other world kind of
Mm,
thing.
yeah.
And the main connection I've heard a lot about is Tirnanog, which is the Celtic other world, basically. I think, if I remember correctly, it's where spirits can go afterwards. It's like effectively, I, that's about as much as I know about it. I still need to do
Yeah.
some research, to be honest, so I'm not going to talk too much on it. Um, but that's really interesting. And then also just the idea of like the Helfen, of course, and the connections to Norse mythology a lot. Um, a lot of people suggest that like the lands between are meant to be Midgard, but we don't really see any of the other realms too much. Then the only other
Mm,
one I can think of is then obviously all of the land underneath, like the deep depths and everything, would be Niflheim, I want to say, or Hell, probably Hell, more accurate.
yeah.
Um,
Helheim.
yeah,
Or, mm,
Helheim. I think it can be. I think it does get referred to as Hell, like single L or Helheim, even though the goddess is also single L Hell. Because I mean,
yeah.
Christianity changes everything. But so that those are things are really interesting. And then also even going further, the idea of dreams being their own realms is, I think, also a thing in a couple of different mythologies. Off the top of my head, I can't like remember exactly which ones. But then also, of course, the Lovecraft stuff, which is extraordinarily interesting. Just to consider that we use the words outer gods.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Mm,
and that like them having their own realms that are separate and in they can connect to people through dreams would just make a lot of sense. Like Moog has his epiphany at some point in the sewers, and where he is contacted by an outer god, and after having his epiphany, is then able to like his blood changes to some extent, as far as we can understand. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Um, but either way, he's able to summon the blood boon and stuff like that.
mm, mm.
Which, again, if it was to happen during a dream, would make a lot of sense potentially.
Yeah, I really like how Elden Ring does the whole. And it's a bit of a tangent, but I really like how the Elden Ring does the whole eldritch horror side. I
So
think I
good.
kind of prefer it to like Bloodborne somehow. Like I'm sure this is a very controversial opinion on the internet, but I like that there is this mixture. This is not just about like incomprehensible higher dimension beings that kind of contact us directly in our heads and influence us, and but there is also this aspect of like to Elden Ring's brand of eldritch horror that is the outer gods are somehow like there's a cosmological element to it, right? Like
Hmm.
there seems to be these entities that we are dubbing as outer gods, but it's not even clear if they are even like uh, conscious entities or
Hmm.
what they exactly are. They might be just concepts that exist like in vast distance in outer, like very far from us in outer space, and they're somewhat somehow exerting their influence over us, like the old gods or what old ones.
Old
I'm not
gods,
sure.
old ones. I think it
Uh,
either works. I think the old ones are more
Great one.
generic.
Okay.
The great ones.
I was thinking about the
Yeah.
specific Bloodborne term. So the
Okay.
great ones
Yeah.
in Bloodborne are eldritch and they're supposed to be unknowable, but they are somehow more understandable than
That's true.
Elden Ring's outer gods because we have an idea of their motivation. We know that they want to reproduce, right?
Hmm.
So that's one of the themes of Bloodborne. They want to reproduce, so they're like kind of understandable in that way, and it also like solidifies them as an entity that could reproduce, for example. But in Elden Ring, it's not even clear what the outer gods want. We want like we know the greater will kind of wants order, whatever that means.
Hmm.
He just wants order, like, and he seems to be fine with any brand of order. Like if it seems like if Malenia became the god and it's an order of rot, then so be it. That's
Yeah.
fine. It's perfectly cool. He's perfectly fine with like people usurping previous orders and imposing their own orders on top.
Hmm.
But other than that, we don't really even understand what even are the other outer gods. Like they say, like for example, the example of Moog.
Hmm.
All we know is that it says the mother of truth craves wounds.
Yeah.
So there is this, and somehow by magically thrusting something into the air, you can like create this gash in space
Mm-hmm.
and pull out the blood of this outer god who seems to be omnipresent in a way because it exists everywhere in space. And you can stab it and make it bleed, and that's what blood fire is, you know? And similarly, what all this outer god wants is to be wounded. And, you know, it's like it's really a difficult concepts to try to wrap your your head around. So, yeah.
There was an interesting take I heard recently of the outer gods effectively just being like how we would see ants, right? Which is like it's a generic idea that I've heard a lot since like even
Yeah.
just people reading HP Lovecraft and stuff like that, where it's just like Cthulhu is a being so massive and understand like just you can't understand them like entirely. Yet they meddle with humans like they're tiny little playthings, and even just like perceiving them can cause you to go mad because of their scale. But
Yeah.
just the idea of just like so specifically one person I saw, their theory was that the greater will is just like a gardener, and there's just a small section of their garden that is the lands between. They don't
Yeah.
really care what happens to the garden, that section of the garden, so long as it is ordered and it doesn't mess with the other sections.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
it's a very strange kind of concept, but it just, I think it's more of just a way to like think about how these beings are like just present and the way they like this doesn't necessarily work exactly, especially for like the mother of truth, like the formless mother. Like if you are literally piercing the formless mother, it can't like there's got to be something going on a little bit more than just like, oh, they're a being that's just unknowably large or different from somewhere else.
Yeah.
um but it's still interesting.
Definitely is. Yeah, we definitely went on a tangent there.
That's, I'm gonna go even further on a tangent because I
Yeah.
want to talk about so you mentioned your hot take about like uh the outer gods being a little bit better representation than even Bloodborne. I
Yeah.
want to mention one of my hot takes. And the hot take is this is just how I think about it. And don't get me wrong, I definitely think that there's like I'm going to preface this again with the fact that I definitely think that this boss battle is not great. And I think it could be better, but it
Yeah.
still remains one of my favorite boss battles in the game. I really enjoy the Elden Beast fight.
I do like the Elden Beast. Like, people some seem to have some reflexive aversion to a boss that doesn't, I want to say, conform to how they want to play,
Hmm.
preferably, right? But I think that would make for boring designs if all the bosses played the same, you know? I think it's fine if some bosses play differently. If a boss try to like create distance between you and him and
Hmm.
jumps around a lot, that's okay. Like it's not a speed run, all right? You're not a speed run. You're not trying to kill Elden Beast in sub 1 minute necessarily. Okay, it's okay to take your time. The music is dope. Like the effects are amazing. The arena is beautiful. Like the Elden Beast is cool. Like just just I don't know. I definitely agree. I do enjoy the Elden Beast fight. And the biggest complaint I see about it is that it runs away from you and you can't attack it a lot of the time. And yeah,
Yeah, I mean, the two biggest complaints I see is firstly that one, and then the second one. Well, there's three complaints. The three complaints always come down to it runs away, Elden Stars is bullshit, and it should have been Marika. Um, and I
wow.
okay, it runs away. Sure, I definitely think if you had Torrent in that fight, it would be more like
You
potentially
know,
enjoyable.
it
Um,
it would probably be very fun with torrent. You're right. Yeah.
yeah, and I don't necessarily know why they didn't allow you to like use torrent, and I mean that it just is what it is the way I see it. They were kind of training you. You see a big thing, you get on torrent and run at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't really fit in this case, which is kind of strange. The Elden Stars, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I don't even think it's the worst part of that boss battle, personally. I've literally never had a problem with Elden Stars, but there's the attack where it shoots lots of small beams at you. Um,
You just sprint it though.
you just sprint it, but like, I don't know, like I can outrun the Elden Stars, and then the attack with all of the like small beams
Did
consistently just kills me.
Did you
I
play the? Did you beat Elden Beast on release because you couldn't outrun it on release?
I did beat Elden Beast. Oh, actually, I think I beat it like 2 or 3 patches after.
Because
So
maybe yeah, because you couldn't outrun it on release.
no.
You kind of had to try to mitigate it and avoid like the big explosion at the end, but you
Hmm.
would unless you were like extremely far away, you would be like systematically being chipped by the small mini stars
Yeah,
of Elden Beast
I can see
of
that.
Elden Star. Yeah,
But like the final point of it should have been Marika. I I would have liked to
yeah,
see Marika more in this game for sure. But I also know that the things that I would have liked in the game don't necessarily make the game better.
yeah, for sure. There's definitely an element of I guess maybe that's too much of a word to use, like being less entitled.
Yeah.
Uh, Imagine that word, but less, less in intensity.
Yeah.
Like there is an element of like just just accepting what the game presents to you. You know, like not everything is gonna hit the right notes for you specifically. They might hit the right notes for other people. You know, so there is some variety. So also the America thing is a, it wouldn't make much sense from
No,
my
it wouldn't.
interpretation and understanding of the lore.
Hmm.
It just wouldn't make sense that Marika would fight you to begin with. Like Marika is her role in the story. Like I have this whole interpretation, like this overall interpretation of the game's lore. It's a whole thing that maybe one day will come out in video format. But she has been a conspiring, plotting character that has done many things and set up for things to happen the way they did. Is the way I see it. And by the point you reach the end of the game and you face the Elden Beast, this is the culmination of everything that happened.
Yeah.
And like her role in the story is basically done by that point, you know. She might or might not be just dead,
Yeah.
arguable if that's possible in that situation. Uh, but yeah, she. I don't think Marika fighting at the end would have made much sense. I mean, maybe
No.
if the story was different, then maybe. But yeah,
I think thing is that like the reason I love the Elden Beast so much, I don't even. I'm also gonna say that I don't even think that the Elden Beast is the best boss battle in the game, like even thematically or like vibes or fight wise. But it is just I really do enjoy it because it's just. Firstly, I know again a lot of people were like, why can't Radagon be separate and then you fight Radagon, beat Radagon, and then fight the Elden Beast? But it's I feel like it kind of brings all of the themes of Elden Ring together. You've got a creature that is seemingly so unknowably strange and different and doesn't seemingly fit into the story, but kind of brings the entire story together. It's
no,
beautiful, its music is beautiful, it's strange. Um, and then it comes after this boss battle, which is just pure. If Radagon's boss battle feels like pure adrenaline,
it's
like
very
the
intense. Yeah.
music is intense. He's really aggressive most of the time. if you're casting spells, he just bats them out of the way with his hand. He's just a very different kind of vibe where you have this whole feeling of everything is coming up to this one moment, and then it feels like everything just changes as soon as you get into this boss battle with the Elden Beast. It doesn't even feel like the Elden Beast is particularly trying for most of the boss battle until it casts a couple of the bigger cast. It just feels so fluid and different, but at the same time, it's so theatrical. It's really hard to put into words the difference in feeling, and then when you finally beat the game, I've beat the game a couple of times now. Though I beat the game, but like Steam for some reason doesn't track sometimes when I beat things, which is really annoying. So I've got like a couple of playthroughs of the game already that I've done most of the endings, but it hasn't tracked a couple of them, so I have to do it again and hope it works. But every single time I beat the Elden Beast, it feels the exact same of just like it feels so good. It feels like you really are the hero of this story, and then you just get to just done it. Like, you've done all of these things to get up to this point. You beat this giant yellow slug, and the music is amazing, and then you get like the end credits, which also, I don't know if anybody else has like listened through the music for all of the end credits. It's really good because
Isn't it a compilation of
yeah, it's Godrick's theme, then Beast Clergyman, which is
Grank.
yeah, Garank. So it's not like it's Malekith's theme basically. And then I want to say I don't remember what the third theme is, but it's then Elden Beast, like the last one.
Yeah.
It's just like I think most of it's down to the music, to be honest. The music is really good.
I mean, you said the Elden Beast is definitely not one of the best bosses in the game, and I agree. But if we're talking in terms of presentation, it's definitely like up there, if not the best boss in the game. I would say in terms of presentation, it's probably a tie between that and Mog and Radagon for me.
Okay, yeah.
So that just in terms of pure presentation, like music and setting and all of that, like visual elements, I think it's definitely way up there.
Yeah. Sure. So speaking of that, then who do you consider your like the best boss battle in all ways, shapes, and form?
Gameplay wise, it's probably Mog.
Okay.
Like the Mogwin Palace, Mog. Oh, you want another hot take? I hate Malenia, man. I think Malenia is like really bad boss design, especially for one of the most hyped up characters of the game in a way, you know. Yeah, it's like a lot of people like Malenia, and I understand that she's cool, but in terms of actual mechanical, like back and forth between the player, like the actual fight, I think Mog is probably like the best one. Radagon is also up there. Going back to like what you said about like separating the phases, I honestly think that could be a good idea for From. Not because not to like shorten the boss fights or make them less hard. I think you could do that and compensate by giving each boss more HP. Because I think some boss fights are like really cool.
Too short.
But too short. They don't get like their chance to shine because they are like the phase 2 or phase 3 of something.
Yeah.
You know? Like I would take a beefier Radagon, you know, and then when you beat him, you just move on definitely to Elden Beast, you know, just so you fight him more. Or for example, like Malekith. Malekith dies so fast, and it's like way cooler than the Beast Clergyman, and he dies extremely fast. I would take a longer Beast Clergyman and Malekith as two like back-to-back bosses.
Yes.
Than like one boss fight when it's two phases and they have like way less HP.
For sure. I love Malekith. I think Malekith is like I'm gonna cheat and say my top two are Godfrey and Malekith.
They're definitely really good, yeah.
Because both of them, like battle wise, feel really good. I think I really enjoy both of them. They both have a couple of moves that like still throw me off even now. And just the music for both of those battles is amazing. The thematic, like feeling of both of them. Malekith, after you feed him all of the death root, the the lines he says genuinely break my heart, and
Yeah.
it's
Mm.
it's crazy that like I genuinely like watch that, I play that, and I'm like, that hurts. That actually hurts. Like, I'm feeling things. Why is a game where I murder everything making me feel things? Uh, and
I think.
yeah,
Yeah. Go. No. Go ahead.
um, and then also just the way Malekith looks in the second phase and the moves he does. Even though I know a lot of people don't like how like jumpy he is, they
He's so
look
cool.
so cool. I
You can parry him too when he jumps, so it's okay.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so good.
Yeah. One of the takes that, one of the hot takes, I guess. I'm not
Mm,
sure if it's a hot take, but one of the takes that gets to me the most is the idea that the last third of the game of Elden Ring is bad. What I couldn't disagree more.
mm,
I understand some people don't really like the consecrated, like the snow region in general,
mm.
but like the two of the biggest and best legacy dungeons are in the last bit of the game. It's the
Mm.
Faro Mazula and Elphael, and
So good.
also
Yeah.
like most of the best bosses in the game are at the end. Like they are like
Yeah.
all stacked up at the end. It's actually like I don't understand. It's actually like the best part. I I think there's an element of burnout there. You know, like
Yeah.
people get to
100%.
that point of they're super burnt out. In my first playthrough, it took me like 120 hours to finish the game, and I was because I took like the week off
Mm.
for the release, and I was basically playing the game 10 hours a day for 2 weeks. You know,
Nice.
and I was super burnt out at some point because I was like 70 hours in. You know,
Mm.
and I haven't made it to the Altus plateau.
Wow.
The, and because I was trying to do I was trying to like 100%, like not miss anything. You
Yeah.
know, I had this whole quest about trying to find where gravity magic is, and I would. Anyway, it's a whole other story. uh, and yeah, so I would reach like the Altus plateau at like 70 hours. And like 70 hours is like longer than any FromSoft game with DLCs in terms of first playthrough. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm not even like halfway through the game at that point. And I was extremely burnt out because I was playing so much, trying to do everything, and also because like the dungeon kind of gets repetitive at some point, and also you have to like imagine that you get like in that whole like section of the game, you get maybe two proper boss fights, like
Yeah.
that are like good mechanically speaking, and those are Margit
Hmm.
and Godrick. Like
Yeah.
it's literally like the first like the first legacy dungeon, and everything else is like cool mini bosses for dungeons, all
Mm.
right, or elite enemies, nothing crazy, or gimmick bosses. Like as mind blowing as Radagon was,
Mm.
you know, like one of the best setups. Like I was having like the most intense chills I could have while walking up to the festival, and
Mm.
that music was playing, and like Jaren was doing his whole speech.
Oh yeah.
I was so excited because it's like I heard about this guy so much. I was so excited to fight him. He has been hyped up so much, you know.
Mm.
And I remember like talking to Blythe, and Blythe would be like, "Was it Blythe or like Blythe was hyping up?" And also like Alexander.
Yeah. Both of
Alexander was
them.
like, I can stop shaking. I'm so excited to fight this like this legend, you know."
Mm.
And that was like literally the same. Like, oh my god, that's literally me in real life, you know. About just getting like the excitement of fighting Radan, and the fight was spectacular. Like the fact in terms of spectacle, it's fucking amazing. Like this huge battlefield, like it's you have this whole squad of people fighting with you. He
Mm.
goes into the stratosphere, he crashes down as a meteor, like the gravity magic, he flies. Okay, it's amazing, amazing, great, but it's still just technically kind of a gimmicky fight, right?
Mm. Yeah, I
And
can see that.
like Renala, same thing. It's kind of a gimmicky fight. There's not like it's not one of those fights where there's like that really like fluid and interesting back and forth between the player, and you get to use like all the mechanics of the game, like with like the staggering bosses, breaking their posture,
Mm.
you know, like the guard counters, etc., etc. And those were just like Margit and Godrick at the
Yeah.
start. So for 70 hours, those were the two only proper bosses. You know, I felt like I had, and I was feeling really burnt out. But I was so happy at the end of the game because then you have like six of them, like
Oh
back
yeah.
to back. You know, so it kind of made up for it. But yeah, like burnout can be a. The game is so huge that burnout can be a genuine issue.
Oh yeah.
For sure.
Um, I think I took about 120 hours myself as well. But I do want to like slightly disagree on the Radahn point. But the thing
Mm-hmm.
is that like he's a gimmicky fight. If it's kind of awkward to say it like he is a gimmick fight, right? Because you can summon so many people. But if you choose not to summon so many people, he's really fluid and it's really enjoyable to fight him, I think. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just a case of on your first playthrough, I don't think anybody did that. I think I don't think that well, at least all of the people I played like alongside or talked to while they were playing, majority of them did summon everybody.
Yeah.
Or like they started being like, I'm gonna 1v1 Radahn, and then they got their shit kicked in, and then went, I'm gonna summon everybody. Why is Patches leaving? Um,
Yeah.
but like if you do get to the rhythm of fighting him, he's really, really like he's a really fluid, enjoyable boss fight. But at the same time, all of the really, again, I do agree fully. I think the best boss fight, there's the only boss fight in the entire game that I have no problem saying I have no problems with this boss fight. Like it is virtually perfect. Is Godfrey, because
Yeah.
his first battle, like the first half of his fight, is his golden shade, which I actually really enjoy because then you already know like the general idea of how it's gonna go, and then your
Yeah.
expectations are destroyed because everybody was like, "Oh, Sarosh is gonna jump off and you're gonna have to fight two people." No,
Yeah.
he murders Sarosh and he just throws everything away and just 1v1s you, and I was mind blown by that. And then his fight not only changes completely, he just gets hyper aggressive. It's
Yeah.
everything he does can be countered by like a roll or a jump, and it actually needs you to jump sometimes. Like it's just a
Mm-hmm.
lot easier to do so, rather. Which again, more game mechanics, forcing you to change your options, and then he just once you beat him, he's just like, "Damn, Tarnished, you
You're
deserve that
good.
crown." Like it's so good.
Yeah. Uh, Godfrey, I really like the tone shift
Hmm.
in the second phase, like especially like not just the fact that he kills Siraj and he's all barbarian, but also the like the music too.
Hmm.
It's actually really cool. I have unfortunately been spoiled on that development before I got there, sadly.
Ah,
So
damn.
that's unfortunate.
That is
So yeah,
unfortunate.
yeah, definitely one of the best fights for sure, though.
Hmm. Speaking of Godfrey, actually, I came across a couple of well, I was watching Ratatoska's video on like heroic concepts because he's done a couple of them. He did Rykard and Godrick,
Mm-hmm.
and he was talking about how Godrick uh has all of these things that he think Godfrey is, like axe and
Yeah.
grafting with the lion, and the reasoning behind it, and how it's actually all of those things are holding Godfrey back, whereas Godrick is using them to kind of make himself seem stronger. He uses the axe, grafts things on himself so he is stronger, whereas the reason Godfrey has Sarosh is to calm his temper. Um, I just want your thoughts on that.
I honestly, Godric is one of the more interesting of character of the demigods
Hmm.
for sure. Like he is this really like meek and weak guy. Like he's portrayed and his actions portray him as a really like uh ugly and pathetic individual, right? But at the same time, there is some a little bit of I want to say like empathy you can have for him
Hmm.
because you can see that this guy is the last of this depraved line and heritage that's actually like completely crushing him under its weight, you know.
Hmm.
Like Godfrey is this Chad that became tarnished, was banished from the lands between, and is still revered to this day, like
Hmm.
despite all of that. And Godric is like this really like meek and frail guy that has to live up to that legacy and the actions he take in order to live up to that. And there is like I really, really like this design because of the obvious insecurities and how they are portrayed in his design. Like you said,
Mm.
the use of like the axes. He's basically a poser in a way, you know.
Oh yeah.
Like he's trying to pose as this golden lineage, like Godfrey inheritor, Chad. Like even when he kills you and he goes forefather one and all, didst thou witness, you know, and
Mm.
like great Godfrey and all of that. He's definitely like I, one of my favorite designs in the game for sure. And also the concept of grafting is uh I never thought of it as an imitation of Siraj.
Mm.
But I guess it makes sense because it's like I can't see any other reason basically
Mm.
like why they landed on grafting in a way like Godfrey maybe uh and Godrick after that. Like what led them to land on grafting? And I guess
Yeah.
it kind of makes sense that you have like this beast on your back for Godfrey and it's always part of him. So maybe
Mm.
that's the origin of it for sure. Yeah.
The other thing for grafting that I think is really interesting is the gargoyles. When you kill the twin gargoyles, I believe you can get one of their weapons, and it does mention that they used to graft their weapons and then also the gargoyles. So a lot, and I think somewhere you could like obviously you can find the like half gargoyle monsters that just spew fire.
Yeah.
Um, but also I think there is a place where you can find a gargoyle, like one of those gargoyle monsters, surrounded by body parts of gargoyles, as if they were like
Oh
intended to
really?
be regrafted, right? So the other theory was that they were doing it for the gargoyles, so those golden lineage people were like, oh, we should do that as well, um, which is interesting. But that also kind of doesn't necessarily lead one into the other, because arguably it would make sense that I think that the younger ones in the golden lineage were like, we're gonna copy Godfrey, and then they were like, oh yeah, also our gargoyles are beginning to like break and die. Why don't we just graft the best parts of them back together to make them useful again?
You know the
Um,
Gargoyles are one of the most interesting like enemies in the game.
hmm,
Like lore wise, there is a lot of things going on with them. It's not that there is more to them than it seems apparently.
hmm.
Like for example, like do you think they are like golems or do you think they are like living beings?
That's a very difficult question to answer, because I think one of the biggest themes about Elden Ring in general is at what point does life become life, I guess? And what point do
Mm-hmm.
you consider it like the same as everything else? Like between, as we mentioned earlier, the Albinorics, the Sweetings, the Tears as well,
Mm-hmm.
like the Mictirs and stuff like that. There's a lot of things in the game that a lot of people would very happily consider not to be the same as human life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I would say like the gargoyles, specifically because of like the connection with the Death's Kindred, and how, at the very least, from my understanding, Garunk saw them as like, so Malekith saw them as like somewhat it's like equals, enough to like give them actual destined death on their weapons. Um,
Yeah.
I would say even if they were like originally golems or made, I think that they are considered, like at least by some people, considered alive and like the same as other beings. But I think based on like the visual evidence, I think golem, like that kind of creation, makes a lot more sense. Purely like between that and the grafting, and how like they are like kind of amalgamated, some of them, there is some level of like the people in the game not necessarily seeing their life as completely valuable, because if you do think a creature's life is fully valuable, why are you then happy to cut parts off of it and put it onto something else?
Mm. Interesting. And there is also the fact that they seem to be serving the Golden Order specifically,
Yeah.
and on a higher level, stuff like Malikat, which shows that they have like a deeper connection to the actual origins in a way of the
Hmm.
Order compared to like um, the rest of the soldiers, I would say.
Yeah.
Um, but also the fact that they are found mostly around the Eternal Cities. Like you find 2 in the Nokron Aqueduct, and they are guarding the way to the deep roots,
Yeah.
and then you have a bunch of them in the nameless Eternal City.
Hmm.
A lot of them, which puts into question like what's their relationship to those things. You know, there is no like obvious Golden Order presence, I would say, in the deep roots.
I mean, there's Godfrey, not Godfrey, Godwin.
Godwin. Yeah, I mean, there's
Yeah.
Godwin, like his corpse is there,
Yeah.
but it doesn't seem to be like quite.
Og.
Uh,
I mean,
mhm.
we know Siluria's down there, and we see all of the like
Oh, you're right,
banished
actually.
knights and stuff like that down there. So
You're right. You're right.
arguably, there is some level of, were they there before the Golden Order, and then they were a relic that was like brought along as well? Because I would assume, like, from the timeline that I understand, the Crucible Knights were working under Godfrey,
Godfrey. Mm-hmm.
and they all kind of disappeared when he did, or they all moved on to wherever they went when he like was forced to leave. And around the same time, it would make sense. The timeline is very difficult to like to note, because it would make sense that the Golden Order like was definitely a thing by that point, right?
Yeah.
And all of these are so they're all working for the Golden Order, like the Crucible Knights were, and so were the I've forgotten their name. I've been literally just talking about them.
The
Uh,
mausoleum soldiers.
yeah,
Or
the Muslim soldiers would have been, the banished knights would have been, and then the golem things. I forgot. I don't know why I can't remember.
Gargoyles.
Gargoyles. There we go.
Yeah.
I don't know why my brain just malfunctioned. But the gargoyles would have been around the same time. So whether they were created, they probably would have been created beforehand, I would assume. But we don't really have like enough information, I don't think, to really suggest which side. But the
Okay,
fact,
the last.
yeah,
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
the fact that they are down there kind of suggests like potentially they were either banished at the same time, or they are defending things they think are important. Like Siluria's defending the root of the great tree, right?
Yeah.
What are the rest of them defending? The root down to the deeper depths.
Yeah.
Are there other gargoyles like into the main city, Leyendell? A couple of Death Kindred across other paths, like Garank, and then I think there's one on the path up to the mountaintops.
Yeah.
It seems like they're like strategically placed, and I would
They're
say
definitely very strategically placed.
almost certainly by Marika. Like,
yeah. The other interesting things about them is that if you take a closer look at them, they are very organic, especially in terms of like the way they are in their face. They seem to be stone-like, but their features are not that of an actual statue. They are not like the catacombs, like for example, golems and statues that way. They are very, very much organic. Like they have like mouths with like teeth and missing teeth and tongues and almost a fleshy like quality to them. And also, which I think is the most interesting thing about them, is they are actually a union of 2 gargoyles, but not perfectly completely merged together. One of them is white and the other is red. So if you take I don't know if you ever took a closer look
yeah.
at their face. Yeah. So there's like they have like this half face coming off of them, you know. And so there is this union of the white and the red, which evoke Marika and Radagon, you know, and how they merge later in the game. So it also the fact that they are positioned, and you can find a bunch of them in the Nameless Eternal City, which is right under uh, Lanedale, makes you ask a lot of questions, you know, especially like were they? I'm just like throwing random ideas here, but are they like possibly previous attempts at creating a rebis? So it's like if you talk about the alchemical inspirations for Elden Ring and the creation of this divine hermaphrodite, like it's also the colors which really like makes you lean towards that train of thought, because it's the union of the white and the red, which is the, you know, like the prerequisite of the union of the red king and the white queen to give you the rebis. So yeah.
So here's another thought that I had. So this is gonna be a little bit of a tangent to some extent. But so George R. R. Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones, was influenced by the War of the Roses. Um,
Mhm.
so the Roses had the House of York versus like Lancaster, right? And obviously, like we can see that very obviously, Lannisters being Lancaster, etc. The
Mm.
important thing is that York had the reason why this kind of triggered in my brain is that York's symbol was a white rose and Lancaster's was a red rose, and by the end of the war, they merged to make the Tudor white and red rose.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
so the idea that like so firstly that Marika is like white or golden, and then uh Radagon's red. That has like somewhat connections. But you've also got the whole idea of like there is a lot of stuff about houses fighting between the Carrion Royals fighting the Golden Order and then becoming one through marriage. Um,
Yeah.
there's a lot of symbols across the game of lots of different heraldries being joined together, which is just well, that's pretty normal across just like real life, but also specifically like Game of Thrones had a lot of that as well. Um,
Mm.
and I think that's very interesting just as like a thematic like viewpoint of again this is going to get like wild speculation, but there's no necessary reason why those gargoyles weren't like politically fused. It's going to sound strange, but like if you were to have two different people making gargoyles and then you had a war and then you finished that war and you were like okay, but firstly all of our like things are breaking. But
Yeah.
secondly, we need a way of proving that we're not going to use these weapons of war against each other. And then somebody was like, let's fuse both of our armies together to prove to both of each other that firstly, we can't use them against each other because they will be under both of us. But
Yeah.
secondly, as like a way of showing that we are joined together properly now.
That's interesting, but it begs the question of who were the war inside.
Yeah, which kind of I think that like that whole concept is dead in the water, very
Oh.
obviously. But I do think it's very interesting just as a concept by itself.
Yeah, definitely.
I the problem is I don't even think I would know who those be.
Um, we don't really.
'Cause-
If I had to go back in time and assign those gargoyles to anyone, it would be the Golden Order at all. And if I had to go further back in time and assign them to someone, it would be like Newman's or Eternal City. Like
yeah,
I can't see any other faction that would be, you know,
reasonably makes sense. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, but that I think at the very least is like at least somewhat interesting. Um,
yeah,
the other thing I just want to go back to Godrick as well, which is quite interesting. Um, So, okay, before I go back to Godric, again, mild tangent. So we were talking about how the gargoyles look like they have like stone, but they're also very obviously like flesh and blood. There
yeah.
is another creature in the game that is very similar, I think, and those are the dragons. Um, so
Yeah.
the dragons obviously like the gravel scales, the gravel stone is their scales, right? Um,
Yeah.
and you can make like there are weapons in the game that are made of them that do extra damage against dragons because or like the whole idea is that the original dragons were the strongest and they had the most of this, but the younger ones have shed it a little bit more and are a little bit more vulnerable to that original, um, like using those scales against them, which is why I think it's like the dragon katana, as well as like a couple of other things are just not
Yeah.
they're not going to enjoy it, right?
Yeah.
Um, but so that's interesting to consider. The Golden Order were the people who were creating the gargoyle. Maybe they, because they did defeat the dragons and then befriended them. Maybe the way they made the gargoyles, because it's a creature that spews fire or something else, like either fire or poisonous gas out of their
Mm.
mouth, and they have wings, and yet they fight with like weapons. It seems like it could be a very easy merger between uh like it looks to me like somebody tried to replicate dragons in a humanoid way.
Hmm. I I think I'm gonna disagree.
Okay.
And here's like, first of all, you mentioned, do they ever use fire actually?
Well, you know the ones without arms and legs. Like there's one in Leyendell, and
They
there's a
use
couple. The
perfume. Okay.
perfume.
Yeah, it's the
Oh, it
same
is.
effect as
Yes,
the like the
true.
perfumers, like the spark,
That's true. Yes, it is.
which links them back to alchemy.
Does this is true? Yeah.
And but you mentioned something really important, like the whole poison thing. That's
Mhm.
also weird that like a stone thing would spew poison from inside of it.
Yeah.
Uh, like the draconic connection. I I would need more, like if they were like at least scaly or something, But they just seem to
Yeah.
be made of stone, and the reason why I don't tie that specifically to the dragons is there is a lot going on with people turning into stone in this game,
Yes.
and I have no clue what that's about. Like I
That's
have like
true.
no lead on that. Like there's obviously Marika and Radagon, which are somehow made of stone.
Yes.
You have Rani's corpse, which look very stone-like.
Very
It
stone
looks
like.
like
Yeah.
charred stone, you know, uh, like some sort of like what's it called? Like when magma cools off, like
Oh.
the black
Yeah.
stone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, she looks like very stony. Uh, the miners are made of stone for some
It's
reason.
true.
Like even trolls can be afflicted by that somehow.
Mm.
So there's this whole like petrification thing going on. Even beyond that, if we go to Farum as well, the dragons are not just stone outside. Like the one where the Crucible Knights, there was a Crucible Knight overlooking a dead dragon.
Hmm.
Like, and you can see the dragon is broken off in parts.
Yeah.
Like he's like fully completely petrified, like through and through. Like the parts that are broken off, you can see it's just stone inside. It's not, it's not just the outside layer that's stone. There is also in Farum as well, again,
Hmm.
there is like trees that are being petrified. So if you
Mm.
look around some of the trees in Farum as well, some of them are starting to lose their coloration, like their leaves are turning gray,
Mm.
and like you can see in some trees, like it's progressing. Like half of them is just a normal tree with like the reddish orange leaves,
Yeah.
and part of it is like part of the tree like has all the branch turning completely gray, and like the trunk of it looking like gravel stone. you
Mm.
know so there's this whole petrification thing that's present throughout the whole game. It's not just related to the dragons, but I cannot make like any sense of that. Like I can't
Yeah.
link it to anything really. It's a big mystery to me.
I think it's also interesting to note that the Erd tree itself, the like actual bark of it looks really petrified as well
Yes,
on the
likely. And
outside.
the big trees you just found around everywhere are like straight up petrified, like the ones you find in the underground and
Yeah.
the consecrated snowfield. They're straight up. I have, I had this really like say some extreme like absurd ideas. I wouldn't even call it a theory,
Yeah.
but those trees. I have a whole idea of what those are. The petrified trees,
Yeah.
but you can see some of them in the consecrated snowfield that have fallen off. Right, they're
Yeah.
completely toppled over, and they form extremely, extremely, extremely similar formations to the random ass tall rocky things you find everywhere in the lands between. You know,
Oh.
you know
Uh.
what one I'm talking about? They're just like these like long rocks that are used uh, just around the lands
Yeah.
between,
Yeah.
just stone. They don't make too much sense geologically speaking, but
Yeah.
just there. And so I had this thought, like, what if this like a later stage of this petrification that happens to these toppled over trees because they form these extremely similar formations. They are not like one to one,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. But yeah,
Ah.
and
That's
there is
very
none of
interesting.
those. And like where there are those stone formations, there are none of the trees, and where there are the trees, there's none of those stone formations too. So yeah.
That's actually really interesting. I had like not at all considered that. I really wonder if this is all just meant to be a symptom of the Golden Order and like this current order of the world outliving its like purpose, outliving the point it should have.
I mean, there's definitely an element of that, but I think those are definitely like older
There's
than the
there's
Golden
something
Order.
else going on there, yeah.
Yeah, they're definitely older than that.
Because
But yeah, the Golden Order
yeah,
definitely outlived its welcome.
because I mean, petrification and like I mean fossilization and all of that stuff is real in real life, right? You get petrified trees where they like very specific circumstances make trees turn to stone. Um,
Oh my god, I just had a realization.
yeah.
Uh, now that you said that,
Hmm.
because I have this whole my whole interpretation of the overall lore is has to do a lot with alchemy. So there is
Hmm.
this alchemical themes, but the way I when I look at the events of the game, they almost look like a like alchemical steps of an alchemical process of like a
Yeah.
magnum opus, a great work,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not sure if that's there. I would have to like look it up, but I feel like there is some form, so like some step of the alchemical process that's calcination,
Oh
which
yeah.
would evoke things happening like things petrifying and turn into stone, maybe in some
Yeah.
weird way.
Yeah. Because
So that's something that just popped in my mind.
that makes a lot of sense actually.
My overall
Wow.
theory of
Yeah.
the game, like because there's no way I can like present it all, but you can imagine that to me the lands between and the events of the game
Hmm.
are like a massive like there is this portrayal of an alchemist and in like the replay scroll there is like this guy alchemist. He has like this vial or I
Hmm.
don't know what's the actual word, and like that's inside of that huge vial that's the process is
Hmm.
going on, and there's like these different steps, and that's where you get the union of the red king, white queen, all of that stuff.
Hmm.
And it seems to me that in some aspect like the events of the game and the lands between are that vial. And
Hmm.
the best part, the old dynasty guy,
Yeah.
king statue man, he looks a lot like that alchemist. I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
Yes. I mean, there was a couple of comments I saw at some point where a lot of the Aryan portraits of the original um like sorcerers who have their different like tools and everything, right? Um a lot of their like actual portraits look like philosophers from real life, like the statues of um
uh, which ones? I'm like I
I
can't get.
don't remember it off the top of my head, but I do remember somebody pointing out
Is it the portraits in the academy
yeah,
of
yeah, the
the?
portraits in the academy.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I'm trying to like, hold on. Let me see if I can find this. Like Hierodas. Okay, the one I have an example of is apparently Hierodas can be a reference to Herodotus, who was
Hmm.
a historian who basically went through Egypt, Persia, Babylon, a bunch of different places, and like as far as I understand, he wrote down stories from the people there. Now, I'm not 100% like from images wise, they look like they like pretty similar from the because I'm pretty sure we can see either the statue, either the portrait, or there's like a statue of him somewhere. I don't remember exactly, but
Yeah,
that's what I've got written down. um,
yeah.
but again, I'd have to do a little bit more research into that to like make sure whether that's like true or not. But like, it's very obvious that there is like there's some level of like real life being put into the game here, right? A lot of these portraits I do think are meant to evoke actual people, like imagery wise.
For sure. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's straight up just like the ancient dynasty, just like Greeks and Romans. Like it's just
Yeah,
Greco-Roman dynasty apparently. Just straight up
yeah,
steal it one to one, put it there. I mean, there's some mix of other stuff, but
yeah. There's a lot of influence from a lot of different places.
yeah,
And speaking
definitely.
of that, like that figure that you see through all of the ancient dynasties, that's been one of the other burning questions I've had for like a really long time of just who is this person? Because there's some
Yeah,
statues where it looks like they're like swaddling a child, I think. Um,
it's a tablet
a
actually.
tablet? Okay. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I need to like even then. That's really strange. Just the way that they're holding the tablet is strange, to be fair.
I saw a video recently that they
Uh-huh.
actually figured out what's in on the tablets.
Oh.
I don't remember exactly, but they were basically like some sort of mapping of the region.
Oh. That
Not
would make
necessarily the lands
sense.
between, but it's like I think it was a almost one-to-one copy of an actual tablet in history that was a mapping of a sort of region that lied between two big rivers, which the Ainsel and
Yeah.
Shiofra
Jafra,
rivers
yeah.
and stuff like. So it's mirrored that, I think. So I think that was what's on the tablets.
That's definitely really cool.
But yeah, the figure is really mysterious. Are we getting into the crazy theories that make no sense?
Yeah, let's go. Sure.
Oh boy.
Oh boy, we've got 20 minutes or so left, so this is the perfect time to get into them.
All right, so like I have a lot of crazy theories.
Yes.
Like one of my videos is how Selen is Rani's sister.
Yes.
The other is that Radagon is a mimic,
Yep.
and the next one I talked to you about it, so you can imagine like what standard we're working with here.
Oh yeah. Speaking of which,
yeah,
you guys after this, it'll probably be. Any idea when you're getting that video out? Actually,
hopefully in the next week.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
So
is the best guess.
You're gonna hopefully see this video pretty soon. It'll either be linked below, or at the very least, Cosmos' channel will be linked below. I've heard some of the stuff about this theory. Even if you don't necessarily believe it's true, it is wild, and you're gonna have a great time hearing about it. So go check that out.
It's probably the wildest I have so far, for sure.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so okay, if we're going into like really wild stuff, even by that standard, oh boy, I think, and this is based on almost nothing. I have a feeling that big figure is actually Marika.
Oh. Considering the amount of like gender bending or potential gender bending stuff in the game, that barely surprises me actually.
I mean the appearance and gender bending part is probably like the easiest of the like to imagine.
Yeah, 100%.
But it's just, if I had to throw a wild guess, I've seen like wilder theories. That he's like time traveling Miquella for some reason. I don't know.
Oh, what is it with the time traveling?
I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
I think I would stick with Marika if I have to take a wild guess. It's there is one. I mean, like the justification of how it would be. There's not. It would be too much to call it a justification.
Yeah.
But there is a somewhat conceivable way in my interpretation of the timeline of why and how that would be a thing. But there is one small little hint. Even that would be hard to call a hint in the cut content. There is a thing called, there is Marika's hammer, right? So it's this hammer that's made by Newman outside of the lands between.
Yeah.
And this dynasty, like I'm just gonna like say it straight up, I do actually think they are like the Newman, and we see engraving of them coming from outside of the lands between, right? And for Marika's hammer, actually, there is a few, like 2 other versions of it that weren't used in the final game. One of them is an alteration of it, which is like Radagon's hammer, which would be the hammer Radagon used in the war.
Yeah.
And the other is called Father Marika's hammer. So there is this weapon that's like right next to Marika's hammer, and it's called Father Marika's hammer. That's all I got. That's the best semblance of link I can give.
Yeah. There's not much, but that's definitely really interesting. Wow.
It's definitely like out there for sure.
Yeah. Okay, I want to say like the craziest theory I've heard, and then I want to talk about like the craziest theory I kind of believe, and they're 2 very different levels of like theory.
Yeah.
I heard recently from somebody that they genuinely think that Miquella is Marika. And it's not in a way of Marika made a clone of herself or anything, which could be reasonable, right? Miquella, that actually makes potentially a lot of sense. That like Miquella is genetically identical to Marika, which is something that I've actually I talked about in one of my videos where purely just because they're the same being, I was talking about how it all could be down to parthenogenesis, where a single female creates a genetically identical copy of themselves as an offspring, right? Which happens in like the animal kingdom somewhat. Well, I don't even necessarily believe that that's too accurate. The idea of like Miquella being a clone makes sense. No, this particular theorist believed that Miquella is going to go back in time to become Marika. And
okay.
I guess.
Time paradox.
Yeah.
Big time paradox right
Big
there.
time paradox. But like, they didn't even have any like evidence or anything for it. They were just like, yeah, that's just my headcanon for this. And I'm just like, fair enough. That's crazy, but yeah.
I'm definitely not one to speak, that's for sure. I can
oh, that's great.
yeah, that's wild.
It's very wild. It's definitely a very interesting concept, but I don't necessarily think it's accurate. The most interesting theory that I have that could be true is that the reason Rogier gets dies, quote unquote, or gets death blighted isn't because of Godwyn, because obviously he gets death blighted under Stormveil, right next to Godwyn's second corpse, right?
I think I know where this is going.
But it's because of fear, which it kind of makes sense.
It's possible. I mean,
I think the only piece of evidence that really makes a lot of sense to me for that is because you get Fear's Mist, which inflicts death blight.
I mean, she's definitely capable of inflicting people. That's how she kills, D when you find him. Yeah,
and it just makes a lot of sense to me. I think I don't necessarily know if it matters too much either way. Like whether it is Godwyn or not, the outcome is still the same. But the concept that fear is the reason that Rogier has this epiphany of, oh damn, I'm dying, and then oh damn, these people who live in death, they're not actually that bad, is kind of messed up in a really interesting way. And then the fact that by the end of it, like he ends up as just one of her summons, effectively.
Yeah, she has champions. Yeah,
it's messed up, and I really like it.
It really is. Yeah, I mean, it really could be because of fear. Like we have no way to know. I mean, honestly, I just had the weird impression that Rogier never ever went to Godwyn for some reason, like under the castle.
Yeah.
He says he does he ever? I mean, the only time he confirms that he went there was when he explains why he's being death blighted, because he came in contact with it. He says, but who knows if he's even telling the truth at that point, you know?
Yeah. You do see his blood pool, like his.
Oh really?
Yeah. So right next to the corpse, you can see his blood pool, and you could watch him get death blighted.
Wait, really? That's actually like a developer blood pool thing?
Yeah. Like if you have the game on offline mode, it's the only blood pool there, which is the only reason I figured it out when I was first playing it.
Great, I never knew that.
But it's. I assume that was the only way you could progress the quest, but also I haven't done the quest in its fully, because there are parts that you can just miss if you continue the game in certain ways, right? But even
you don't even have to do the Godwyn thing to progress the
no
quest, right?
You don't. I don't think so. But it's really interesting again because we can walk up to that thing and it doesn't do anything, right? And none of the corpses of Godwyn do anything otherwise, like other than like death rooting things, it doesn't seem like it death mist things. And the only answer I would see is that there might have been a basilisk there at some point, but there are no basilisks there. And
See, if there was a, okay, now I'm starting to like wrap my head around your theory
yeah,
actually. Uh, if there was a basilisk, I feel like there would be a dead basilisk
yeah,
somewhere
but
there.
I don't think there are from the top of my head.
Yeah, so where's the mist from?
Where is the
Basically,
mist from? Yeah,
like because the death root comes out when you accumulate enough death blight, and that's when they come out of the ground to
yeah.
stab you. I guess.
Hmm.
Well, maybe it's from Fia. I mean, he has had plenty of like contact with her, so
Yeah,
and I don't know. Maybe touching the corpse, like
yeah.
maybe
But
maybe
then,
touching the corpse could do that. But yeah,
obviously there's like the environmental amount of like we can touch the corpse and nothing happens.
yeah, it doesn't
But
seem to build up anything on us for
yeah,
sure.
which obviously, I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to for it to have done that to him, right? But
Yeah.
it feels a little bit strange. Um, and the other, like, this is a little bit of like, dare I say, copium for this theory. I don't necessarily know if this is necessarily true, but he doesn't die from the death blight straight away. He dies very
Yeah,
slowly. Um,
yeah,
which
he do be chilling.
like
Sure.
the question is then like how did he firstly how does he not dying from the death blight instantly, secondly how did it take him so like long to die from it, and then thirdly he basically just got impaled by deathroot, right? How is he just like getting up from that and then getting back to the round table hold without some help?
Actually, you're right. Also, he was crippled. It seems like so.
Yeah, so like again all of this feels like Fia just murderated him and then went, you know what, I'm gonna bring you back, or something similar, or somebody else
Yeah.
like helped him out. Um, and then the final part of like pure copium for it is just the idea that like um her death blight doesn't like it kills a lot stronger later, so it could just be that she didn't like her version of the death blight wasn't perfected yet. So
Hmm.
she tested it on him, which is a really terrifying thought.
Oh
It
no.
didn't fully kill him, and then also she's like, "Oh, happy accident. He's a friend now, right?" But then later on, she is able to use it better, and then eventually we get it, and it's in the perfected form, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
again, this is one of those theories where there's not really enough evidence, and again, on top of
Did you
all of
know there
that,
are some?
yeah,
Oh, go ahead. Finish your
yeah,
thought.
I was just going to say, even past that point, it doesn't really matter, really.
Yeah. Yeah. But did you know that there are some enemies that can use death blight? Not the basilisks.
The worm faces. Well,
No,
right?
not the worm faces. Just people. Um.
Huh.
Uh. You know the earth tree that's next to the entrance of Lanedale?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a group of unique enemies that are nowhere else.
Oh, yeah.
It's one omen, a bunch of dudes with like
Hmm.
a dark cloth in front of their face,
Mhm.
and they're dressed in black, and they can use mist, like death sorcery, things like that.
Oh.
Yep,
Yeah.
and even the omen uses it, I think. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just a unique little squad of enemies for some
Hmm.
reason. So
I think that's like geographically, it's like right. It's almost right over where Godwin
probably
is.
right, yeah.
Um, and obviously somewhere near there, there's the crabs that have like Godwin's face on them as well.
Are they there? I don't
They're,
remember.
they're like semi. They're in the moat of Leondel, I think.
Okay,
So they're pretty
okay.
close. They're not like right next to it. And then on that hill directly above it, you can summon a Deathbird when you show up at night.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and obviously the Deathbirds are the whole thing, which is like it's a different type of death, I would say. But also when they do their like screech, I think I
Death
think all of
blight,
them
yeah.
do. Yeah, inflict death blight.
Yep. They're definitely very interesting. There seems to be the guys in charge of sending people to the spirit world
Hmm.
before the Earth tree messed up everything and
Yeah.
changed how things work. Uh, Definitely very interesting. Um, I was gonna say something about the death flash, but it's oh my god, it left my mind. Um, well, I'm gonna move on, I guess.
Yeah.
So the Deathbirds are said to be like envoys of an outer god
Yeah,
that seems to deal with death. Um, it seems like their purpose is just like making sure like spirits leave the bodies. That's why they cremate them.
yeah,
Um, and then after that, they move on probably to the spirit world because their items related to spirit worlds, you get them from them.
yeah.
The Helfen Steeple. Uh, Also, they are said like the symbol of that outer god is the twin birds,
Hmm.
right? All around Farum Azula, there is twin birds.
Hmm. Yeah,
There is like this big carvings of twin birds, which would make sense because it was the age right before the Earth Tree, and in that age, well, they had that system going on. So that's also a bit of something interesting. That also shows that even though you have this order that's based on this Elden Lord and Elden Ring and the God system,
Hmm.
you can still have like influences from different outer gods that permeates into that. It doesn't really uh,
yeah.
seems to be fine. Seems to be legal apparently.
I,
So yeah,
definitely seems like before the Golden Order, everything just kind of lived together in vague harmony.
somewhat. Yeah.
Which is very interesting, I think.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, they're the only conflicts I can think of is the giants showing
Yeah,
up in the mountains and kicking out the dragons.
yeah.
But yeah, that's about it.
But all of the other things we don't really know too much about specifically. I also another interesting thing to note is that the Death Right birds, their wings are made up of souls. It looks like, and I think
Yeah,
there
the
is
priests that would
yeah the
accompany them.
priests
Yeah.
yeah, which is extra interesting because obviously they still have that like even now, but
Yeah, they are tied to them.
hmm, but also like obviously the souls don't really go anywhere but like I would assume just the Erd tree to reborn now.
I'm not
Otherwise,
even sure if they are reborn, honestly. Like, there is
yeah,
this. I think the only mention of rebirth is the dung eater stuff,
yeah,
right? I'm not even sure if that's the case. Like, if there is any other reference of rebirth too. Though, to be honest, I'm not like super familiar with like the whole dung eater lore and
yeah.
dialogues to be able to. But yeah, I think it's the only option. So I'm not even sure if like rebirth was the thing, like in the age of the Earth Tree, or if it just like grabbed all the souls and accumulated them for whatever reason. Yeah.
I would assume that like something is happening to allow new things to be born, right? Because obviously the age of the Erd tree is like well, people die and they are fed to the Erd tree, and then somehow they're like back, like somehow like more people are born, right? But like the question is then like, uh obviously you can still just have a world where like souls go into the Erd tree and are there, and then new souls are either created or are formed outside and then just come in, right? Um,
I mean, there is also the fact that check like the assumed system before the Earth Tree was that the
yeah,
souls, if they would be reborn, they would come from the spirit world.
yeah,
So they might still be
that might still be the case. Yeah,
an influx of them from the spirit world. Like they basically like blocked the input of souls in the spirit world, but the output is still there. Maybe I don't know.
hmm,
There's also that like what was it like the turtleneck meat that mentioned? I think it in the network test that not much people have any interest in reproduction nowadays. So
yeah, that's also true.
yeah,
Huh.
there is not a. I'm trying to think if there is like any young people from from inside the lands between.
I mean, the youngest people I can think of are like Nefeli Lu. She's not
Even then, they come from
young.
outside.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. She's from outside.
seems like everyone is a millennia in the lands between at this point. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, I guess Miquella, but that doesn't really count.
Well, even Miquella is like 7 billion years old
Yeah.
officer. Anyway.
Oh no. Brother, I swear. I swear. Uh, oh no. But all of that's so interesting actually. Just because realistically, we have no reasonable time scale to know how long it's been since started the shattering the wars that happened during the early shattering, and then now, because it seems like everything's been stagnating for a long time.
Yeah, there is no measurement unit. There is just some vague a long time ago, a longer time ago,
Yeah.
ancient time ago.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's all we get. So it's really hard to judge like the
Yeah.
time spans.
Arguably, I think would suggest it's an absurdly long time.
Yeah, we can gander somewhat of a guess from like trying to see how old looking
Hmm.
ruins of things are, but that's about it.
Main reason I would assume it's probably quite a long time is because if you could reasonably track the amount of time, I feel like at least some people would have
You mean in universe?
in universe.
Yeah, no,
But
I think that's just from software being from
yeah, that's
software.
true. That makes a lot of sense. But, but yeah, yeah.
Like, yeah, that would be common sense, but
Why would they bother? They're British.
Br-
Why do we need to track time? We control the world. That's quite funny. The final thing I think I want to talk about before we end is just mostly the intro cutscene and the fact that all of the Tarnished seemingly are dead before they show up.
yeah, most of them at least for sure.
Because
It,
yeah,
good.
because I can't think of any of the Tarnished in that intro cutscene that look alive in those images of them.
I mean, there is even like that shot of that what, what would you even call that cemetery? It's not even a cemetery, it's more
Yeah,
like this huge place with like corpse lined up and just incense and trying to see if any of them is gonna wake up because they're expected to wake up at this point. I
yeah,
think. Um, actually, yeah, some of them are alive when they are sent out.
mm,
Neferi seems to be young, as you said, but
yeah.
Roderica, like the lore of her armor says that
Oh,
she was bullied out and sent on this mission, so she wasn't even dead when she was sent to the lands between.
yeah.
They just sent her out, even though she couldn't see Grace, which maybe that makes sense that she wouldn't see Grace if she wasn't dead.
Hmm,
She didn't die first, so yeah, maybe
yeah.
that's yeah. Definitely, some people have been sent out without dying, but I would say most Tarnished are previously dead people, either like directly people who left with Godfrey
Hmm,
up to all the way back then, or their descendants for the most part.
definitely. Because when it comes down to it,
Fia, I'm
yeah,
sorry, but Fia seemed to be alive.
yeah,
Out of
that's actually
um,
true. She does look
yeah,
like she's just like sleeping next to a body, I think.
yep, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I guess Gold Mask could be alive. It's not like obvious. He's
yeah.
not obviously dead.
Right. He wasn't in a coffin or something. He
Yeah,
just seemed to be.
shriveled up on
Though
this.
he might have died from overdosing on Golden Order juice. Apparently, that's what he was
That's
sipping on.
um, but like obviously some of them are very obviously dead looking. Like Gideon is in a coffin, as we mentioned, with a bunch of eyes and ears, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then Godfrey looks. I think if I remember correctly, he looks pretty crucified.
Very, very much dead. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so that comes to like the final kind of theory I guess I want to talk about with that of the lands between being an afterlife in itself to
Mm,
some extent,
yeah.
or maybe more accurately, it was its own world and it's now effectively become an afterlife because of the return of Tarnish.
It. Okay, so the issue is that we have an like the idea is interesting. I want to talk more about it, but there's also the fact that we have a mention of an actual afterlife,
Yeah, that's true.
and but the lands between is definitely not your standard land.
Hmm.
Like it's like okay, now it's a mess, but let's say at it was definitely a land of gods at the very least, like a
Hmm.
mythical land. Like there is this mention of these people who I think it was one of the starting character presets or classes that says how there's this group of people who would like spend their lives trying to search for the lands between, like
Hmm.
traversing the Sea of Fog, and they would never find it, basically.
Yeah.
And like the Sea of Fog is like there's this mythical thing. Like people come outside and they reach the lands between from the Sea of Fog because they were guided there,
Yeah.
and otherwise the land is not accessible.
Hmm.
There seems that the fate related to what's happening in the land between is spread outside of the lands between, you know. But it's kind of like Olympus or something, right?
Yeah.
It's this land of gods that is not normally accessible to anyone, and the Tarnished would be the only one who were able to come back because they were called back first of all, and also because they're originally from there to begin with. Um. So yeah, I mean, also at its prime, you can see how like every single inhabitant of the lands between is said to be like blessed and graced. They live an awfully long amount of time. Great vitality going on. Like the land is literally like permeated with gold and grace, and
Yeah.
everyone is like adorned in this extremely like fancy and like clothes and like jewelry. Like it's like everyone is just by being in the lands between. Um, it's like it was a land of abundance, and everyone is like royalty in some way,
Yeah.
but the classes that were
Yeah. Yeah.
enslaved, I guess, like misbegottens and stuff. But yeah.
Yeah. It's also interesting. Again, like from Celtic mythology, Turnanog
Mm-hmm.
is all I remember, at least right now, is that Turnanog was meant to be beyond like a large like fog sea, basically,
Mm.
and you had to traverse the fog to get to it, and it was seen as like a very mythical thing in order to do it.
And what was Turnanog?
If I remember correctly, it was like an afterlife kind of place, or it
Okay.
was like it was like effectively the Mount Olympus kind of idea. Um, and I also went to Scotland semi recently, where I went to there's like a dormant volcano there called Arthur's Seat. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that they talked about is they had like a specific Gaelic name for the fog that comes like the sea fog that comes over the sea, which is pretty common, right? Um,
Yeah.
but like the tour guide I was talking to talked about how the people who lived there originally, even in like the like um the time like more recently even, they'd often see it as like a blessing or an omen of one way or the other of that fog coming in. It would change the way that they viewed that day, right? Whether the fog came in or not, it was a good thing or a bad thing. Um, and one of the interpretations I think he mentioned was that if the fog was coming in, it was blessed because fog was connected to the gods, um,
Mm.
which is, I think, again quite interesting. But even though we have like an afterlife realm, like with the Helfen as like the example, right? Um, it could literally just be a case of its afterlife's all the way down.
I mean, it could be a land between
Yeah,
life and death,
literally.
and
Yeah,
like the spirits migrate there
purgatory.
before, yeah, before taking their like last trip to the actual afterlife. Maybe it's definitely not just your average land of the living. That's for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Okay. So here's a really crazy funny theory that is definitely not true, but it's just funny.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, when I was younger, I vaguely watched Lost, and I watched a couple of videos about Lost recently. And all I remember is they get sent to an island, middle of nowhere. Everybody's fighting each other, and then there's a big black like fog monster. The
Oh
lands
no,
between is the Lost Island.
that makes so much sense.
So much
Just,
sense.
I mean, we do have black fog of destined death when Malika dies, so that's
Yeah.
there you go. It's just destined death
It's
coming for
destined
them.
death. The fog
Yeah,
kills people as well in Lost.
it does. So yeah,
Open your eyes, people. The lands between is lost.
it's all coming together now.
Okay. I think that is the perfect place to end this episode. Do you have any like
Yeah.
closing comments, Cosmos?
Um. Not really. Game is fun. I like lore. That's it. That's my closing comment.
Great
It was
closing
a cool
comments.
conversation. Yeah.
This was really enjoyable, and I will definitely have you on again some point in the future. If you would be
I
willing to.
would come back for sure.
Wonderful. So yeah, thank you guys all for watching. Again, shout outs to Cosmos. Again, all of the links in the description. Hopefully there'll be a new Cosmos video out soon. Hopefully I'll also be doing a new video soon, but you know, haha. Alongside that, again, there's the Discord in the description, Patreon in the description, all of that stuff, yada yada. You know the drill. Thank you guys again for watching. Crazy that all of you are so awesome. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. You are amazing. Catch you all another time. Bye bye.